Hi, panel. How are you?
Great.
Doing well.
Great to be with you.
Before we start, Gary, do you have something to tell the group?
I do have something to tell the group. Uh, in Sunday of last week, on Sunday of last week, I got an email notice that the Conservative candidate in the riding of Nipissing to Miskaming, which is mostly made up of the city of North Bay, surrounding area, up north to the Tri-Towns and to Miskaming Shores, the Conservative candidate had resigned on Sunday evening. And I thought, well, that's strange, but yet somewhat interesting, as my wife and I own a home in the riding. My wife is from the riding. We've built a lot of family relationships here. We have a lot of friends here. And they announced that there would be a new nomination. Nomination dates closing today, Friday at 5 p.m. And so I made the decision that in these serious times, perhaps I could provide an option to the voters and the Conservative Party. And so I'm throwing my hat into the nomination ring. Whether or not they accept my candidacy, the deadline is 5 p.m. today. But here we go. And you know what? I think obviously seeking elected office, we know people who do it. It's certainly a worthwhile endeavor. And that goes for everyone from all parties.
Wow. Gary Keller, candidate for Parliament. Congratulations, man.
Thank you, thank you. It's a little scary, a little daunting to put yourself out there, but here we are.
And so there's going to be you're not the only nomination candidate. So the riding association is going to decide sometime in the next several days, or
Well, they have to close nominations at 5 p.m. today, so people have till 5 p.m. to submit their applications to be a candidate. And then if there is more than one candidate, they can accept or not accept candidates. Then there would be I would think a quick nomination meeting sometime next week, as it looks increasingly like we're off to an election.
wow, that's remarkable. Good for you for throwing your hat in the ring.
Thank you.
Um, uh, and it's that time of the year, isn't it? Like I think all of us are now at the point where, as an election approaches, we start to hear from people who are taking it very seriously. Anyway, so for the sake of our little panel family here, I hope you lose. But for the sake of the country, I hope you win. So I'm torn. Uh, Now let's talk about the business of the day. Marcy, what should we take away from that business at Rideau Hall and that cabinet shuffle? Surprises, directions. What do you make of it all?
Well, first of all, I'm still digesting the Gary news, so I'm trying to come to terms with that. I'm very excited for you, Gary. It's a time for all good Canadians to step up and serve in their own ways. So I wish you the absolute best of luck with the nomination. And like
Thank
Paul, I
you.
I selfishly hope that you don't win, not only because I'm a partisan for the other side, but because I want to continue doing this panel gig with you. But here we are. But congratulations to you and good luck.
Thank you.
Um, on what we saw today at Rita Hall, I mean, I'll say a few things. I think today is the beginning of a chapter of a next story, but it really wasn't a terribly new story. It was not so much wartime cabinet necessarily as it was more of a caretaker cabinet. Although the players at the front bench who were widely expected to stay in either their exact roles or similar ones, and I think for the most part that's what it is. They're the same or similar. Um, that cohort on the front bench of the cabinet is absolutely dealing with something akin to warlike footing, and they needed to stay in place, remain in place to continue to fight. I think it would have been a terrible decision to try to disrupt a number of these relationships that are the roles and the relationships that some of these ministers have now forged with the Americans, so to speak, in the American administration. And so I think, like I said, it wasn't necessarily all bright, shiny new. The conservatives will obviously argue that this is the same Trudeau baggage, and I'm sure that Gary will make that point very articulately. But that being said, The guy at the top is new. He is very new. The approach is very different. It felt different. It felt like a chief executive meeting with the C-suite for the first time. I think that is a different kind of focus that he will bring. So that in and of itself is the beginning of the shaping of a new story, and that's what we saw today. Definitely some surprises. We can touch on those later, but it wasn't earth-shattering, and frankly, that's not what Canadians want right now. They want consistency, and they want to see serious people doing the serious work that they expect at this very serious moment.
I was earlier while the cabinet was getting sworn in. I did a live video with Justin Ling, and we had no trouble filling an hour. So it's hard to ask only a few questions. Let me put two to you, Marcy. Two surprises. Chrystia Freeland is still in cabinet, and Karina Gould isn't. What do you make of that?
Um, So, yeah, both of those things were surprising in different ways. I'll say this about Minister Freeland. I think, look, Freeland was not in the cabinet yesterday. She's in the cabinet today. The leadership race didn't pan out as she expected. Obviously, that being said, her breadth of knowledge, her relationships in the United States, her relationships around the world, she has a tremendous skill set that is better put to use inside of cabinet than outside. And clearly, she has taken the decision that she believes she can continue to make a meaningful contribution and that she wants to serve. And I think that is good news ultimately for the party because that wasn't certain. There was a possibility that she may have taken her chips and gone home after what happened on Sunday, but there she is back at it. And I think, regardless of your partisan leanings, that's actually something we should respect from individuals like Chrystia Freeland, who can go and do other things, and she's choosing to do this thing. And we should be grateful for that. So I was a bit surprised that she's taken the role she has, but transport is critical in terms of supply chains, in terms of the railways, aviation, interconnectivity on this continent. So it's a key Canadian-U.S. piece. We don't think about transport very often this way, but after 9/11, transport was the key. Transport shut down the airspace. Transport no-flies people. I mean, it's a really critical and operational role. Good to have somebody strong there. So interesting to see her take that. But it is important and it's a meaningful contribution. So that was a surprise to me, but a happy surprise to me. In terms of Karina Gould, that was a slightly less happy surprise. As I said on this program, I did vote for Karina Gould in the leadership. Not that I would fully aligned with every aspect of her platform necessarily, but I believe she is a very gifted politician, orator. She certainly took the fight to the Conservatives in the House. I think I might even argue she's one of the better, if not the best, House leader the Trudeau government has had. And she relates to people, and she's very effective. She was effective in the leadership, as we said, in the debates. I can't speak to why she wasn't included, but I do think that's an omission. And I would say that Liberal members, and particularly the ones who were more likely to ascribe to her brand of liberalism, tend to have long memories and won't forget that she was excluded. So I don't know the rationale. I'm sure there's a good one, but that one was a surprise and one that's a bit harder for me to decipher.
Yeah, it's going to be, we're all going to be days trying to figure out all of the thinking behind that. Anyway, Allison, shit got real today. After everyone was thinking about a sort of a hypothetical Carney government, and to some extent an idealized Carney government. Now we have the real one, and now he's got a plan. He's going to go to Europe in the next several days. He's talking like he does plan to have an election. Does that bring him down to earth to some extent? I mean, how is today different from yesterday?
Well, I think that the opposition has a real target now. They did before, but now it's official. And now they can start really lining up and defining Carney. Carney's only got a week himself to define what kind of prime minister he would be and what kind of government he would create. I imagine he'll spend the next week. You can see that his cabinet pretty much represents electoral goals, pretty much Ontario and Quebec, as opposed to a lot more regional diversity that we've seen in the past. And I think, he's got about 2 weeks to define himself, and everything that he says will be really an election campaign announcement more than any kind of plans that this government has a mandate to fulfill. I think what's interesting for Carney as well is he can't step into Justin Trudeau's message box. And I think that that's why you're seeing a lot of new partners come into play. You're seeing Christy Clark, you're seeing support from Doug Ford. Carney has a much more of an economic manager message box, and that works right now because the ballot box question will be who can manage the Canada-US relationship. Long term, what does that look like? I'm not sure. the first sign for me was also Karina Gould, who was really the breath of fresh air, the bright light, and a hard worker. And I personally don't understand why she was left out. I think she's got the talent to be amongst everyone else, and it kind of sends a message that there's no place for that younger, hopeful, optimistic, hardworking wing of the party. So we'll see. It'll be an interesting 2 weeks.
I wonder, and I think we would all be speculating. I wonder whether this is just a penalty box thing. Carney had this thing that he wanted to have the smallest possible cabinet, and so there's no room for a Karina Gould, but she'll be back in May, assuming the Liberals are back in. I don't know. Marcy, just briefly, like, does that make any sense to you? Or the idea that, like, Paul Martin came in from outside, John Turner came in from outside. This sets her up to come back from outside at some point. Is that? But I don't even buy that as an explanation.
I can't guess if that's the reason. I mean, there are a lot of hypotheticals in that, but if you were going to say that, and it was in part because of the leadership race and sort of keeping your opponents at bay for a time, then Chrystia Freeland wouldn't be in the cabinet. So I don't know that that's the argument. Again, there are other roles. We should say this. There are other roles, and it may actually turn out in the next 48 hours or 72 hours, we find out that she's got some kind of other role on the campaign. I don't know. I'm not part of the transition, but there may very well be that she is being envisioned for something else, if not this, at this time. So it's hard to say. But banking on forming a government after the next general election, everyone has to be positive and optimistic. And as a partisan, that is my hope that is going to be the case. But you can't bank on that necessarily. Mr. Poilievre may very well form the next cabinet. So you can't really, for somebody who's already in, that may be fine for star candidates who are going to present and say you're going to be in after the next election. But for somebody who was in, is now not in, that's a tougher case to make.
And she doesn't have an easy riding to win either. Sorry, Paul.
Yeah.
She doesn't. She has to focus on the writing. That's true.
I think there's an awful lot of people who don't have an easy riding to win. Like I just think this next couple months is fundamentally unpredictable in a way that's kind of interesting. Speaking of Poilievre forming the next cabinet, Garry, first of all, did you have time to watch any of the Rideau Hall stuff today, or were you out getting signatures?
Well, I was out getting signatures, but I was following. A number of my friends were live tweeting the swearing in as it was happening and the list. So in between stops and grabbing a coffee, I did get up to date on the list and the numbers in the cabinet today.
It's got to be a bit of a relief. Like now you know what you're aiming at to some extent. What do you make of the day's events?
Absolutely. I mean, I've said this for a long time. The sooner that the leadership race for the Liberals could get over, and that Mr. Carney could, do the things that he has to do to make the decisions, who's in, who's out of cabinet, actually is better for the Conservatives, because now we have a very clear head-to-head battle between Mr. Carney and Mr. Poilievre. And obviously, where I stand on that wavelength and who's better to lead the country. But I do think that it provides the clarity, especially if people aren't paying attention, where you have that head-to-head battle. So for any government, I don't care what political stripe it is, a new prime minister swearing in cabinet, that is going to be the best day of your government. And normally governments have a honeymoon period. This government obviously has, and the players in the government have been around for 9 years. And so that's going to be a challenge for Mr. Carney. And because of the compressed timelines, the honeymoon can be 24 hours, 48 hours. But you're going to see the increased contrast from the Conservatives. We've seen David Coletto have some numbers that say that perhaps Mr. Carney's negatives have increased in recent times. So, yeah, I mean, any government, your best day is your first day in swearing in, even though this is a continuation of a lot of the same players for 9 years. So looks like we're having elections soon. And so that time period really gets compressed very fast.
Now, there's a lot of lines that an opposition leader could take against this prime minister, that he's a rookie to politics, that he's inexperienced at a time when we need a steady hand, that he spent so much time in England he is not sure where Canada is. But the line that I mean, I could go all day, but the line that Poilievre has chosen is that Mark Carney is a sneaky person who sold the country down the river when he had his first chance. Garry, is that a attack line that you're comfortable with? Did you see a sneaky sellout today at Rideau Hall?
Well, I think we saw the first we've seen a long run of advertisements for the Conservatives placing this argument forward about Mr. Carney. Certainly his missteps or misdirection around his investments and what he did with Brookfield, moving the head office from Toronto down to New York, that has raised some questions in the media, questions he hasn't really fully answered. He did his blind trust filing, but we don't really know what's in it. And so, yeah, there is certainly an angle of attack there that I am comfortable with, but I don't think it's the only angle of attack. I think you're going to see much more, and probably similar along the lines you've just laid out, Paul, in the coming days, weeks, maybe even hours. So, but to my earlier point about the timing around contrast, you can only really do that. You can do some of that beforehand, but now because it's clear, now people are paying attention. When I was out on the doorsteps today, it was very clear. People are just like, let's have an election. Let's just get it on. So,
okay. Marcy, it does, things are real now. Like he's off to Europe, and he's got Premier Moe in Saskatchewan saying he should be off to China because canola farmers are facing a two-front tariff crush between U.S. tariffs and these China tariffs in response to our own tariffs on electric vehicles. Every choice he makes now, it'll be much easier to imagine another choice that he could have taken instead. That's got to start to wear on him over time.
There will be no honeymoon period for this prime minister. And I would submit that he understands that. Just as I would say the same if there is a different government that forms at the end of this general election. These are not normal times. These are not easy times. This is not 2015. And so, yeah, I mean, there will be no good days for Mark Carney. Quite frankly, Sunday was probably his best day when he was elected leader. Maybe today is a happy day when you form your first cabinet and you get sworn in as at Rideau Hall and you become the right honorable for the rest of your life, whether you serve as prime minister for 4 days or 4 weeks or 4 months or 4 years. It's not going to get better from here. He is got to try to manage a whole lot of expectations really quickly. The international piece, I think, is important, but there'll be some who criticize and say he's going abroad before he's even gone across the country. How can you go how can you go to London, England before you go to London, Ontario? I mean, every move here is going to be questioned, and that's what he signed up for. And I would say that in spite of the fact that he is a political neophyte, I think he understands the assignment, and I don't get the impression that he's not going into this fairly clear-eyed on how complicated this is going to be in every respect. There is no win here overnight. This is going to be a slog. He seems I look, and I like I said on the show, I mean, I don't know him. He does seem to be in it for the long haul, and he does seem to understand that the assignment that he's been given is a brutal one. And I would say, just on behalf of all Canadians, let's hope that he is up to the task. Let's try to reserve our criticism a little bit for the first while and let him find his footing, because we all need to have a prime minister be successful, whoever that is.
Allison, there's going to be a third character in this. So there's the political class, there's the Canadian people in a classic federal election campaign where the stakes are high and the electorate is terribly polarized. The third character is Donald Trump and his court. Trump and Vance and Elon Musk are almost certain to be campaigning from the sidelines. How do you think those two stories, the Canada-US story and the election story, are going to sort of interact over the next month and a half?
I think it's going to really affect Poilievre's positioning. I think you're allowed to reposition yourself once, which he did with a fairly decent speech, but that he slid right back to the gimmicks. And so I think that he is really going to struggle to find himself. He's not the fresh face anymore. He's been in government for a really long time. I don't know that I would call Mark Carney necessarily a fresh face. I certainly wouldn't call the new cabinet fresh. I saw a lot of people who perpetuated some of the issues we had with the last government standing there. But I do think I did see Poilievre's response this afternoon, and what I thought was interesting was he went back on the whole Brookfield thing. I don't think that Canadians care about that. And I also don't know how much longer he can ride the carbon tax Carney thing. I mean, not only has Carney distanced himself, but it's policy light. It's silly. And I just don't think that that's going to keep landing. So the gimmicks and the slogans kind of have to stop. But where I thought he got effective was when he said, look, this government has been in power for 10 years and they're asking you for a fourth mandate. Do you think a fourth mandate is going to make your life more affordable? Do you think a fourth mandate is going to help you buy a house? If they haven't done it in the last 10 years, they're not going to do it now. Is it going to improve your relationship with the United States? No, they haven't set us up well. That resonated with me because I felt like he was actually addressing real policy and not trying to win me over with alliteration and gimmicky rhymes. And also like the carbon tax is not going to make your affordability any better. It's like, that's not going to happen. So there are many other reasons why the cost of living is so high. It has nothing to do with the carbon tax. So stop being dishonest and policy light, because I like you a lot more when you're a statesman. And I actually thought it was good that he congratulated Trudeau instead of what he did with Charlie Angus when he left the House and he basically said, don't let the door hit your ass on the way out. He's got to stop doing that. He's not the opposition guy anymore. And I really think that it behooves whoever's working with him to drill that into him. As you say, like the stakes are high. We can't be silly.
It's interesting, but you do think that he is managing to make a little bit of a tonal shift as he goes along. He's starting to realize that the old stuff isn't playing as well.
Yeah, and to your point about Trump and his ilk kind of intervening or being a foil to this election, I think Poilievre has brushed up too many times to language that sounds just like Donald Trump. You can't do that when you want to show that you're going to stand up to him. And so I think that the footsie that he's played with the folks who occupied Ottawa to even the Canada First policy sounds like America First. I'm not sure that that's going to land.
Garry, let me narrow that down. Would you rather have Elon Musk campaigning for you or against you in this election?
I would rather have Elon Musk campaigning against me 100 times out of 100. I mean, I think, there's been some, I've seen some writings about, Doge and what it's doing. Like Canada needs program review. It needs a serious cutting back on government expenditures. That is absolutely the case to be, but it has to be done wisely and smartly, because you don't want to be firing Ebola researchers, you don't want to be firing air traffic controllers, and you don't want to be firing in the people in the Department of National Defense who are in charge of our defense. We don't have nuclear capability like in the United States, but certainly we don't want to be doing that sort of thing. And so there has to be a rationalization of the government and government spending, especially based on the threat we face from the South. And so, I think that's what will resonate with Canadians. On the Canada First messaging, people like to say, well, where did that message come from? Well, it actually comes from Wilfrid Laurier, who was a great Liberal Prime Minister, and that's where that messaging Mr. Poilievre has come from. The one thing about the carbon tax that everyone has to remember is there was a story earlier this week that said even if the government were trying to repeal it, they're not sure how to repeal it because of the different laws in place. So that could still be, and talk about October surprises for in the United States for elections. It's not necessarily a surprise, but April 1st, the carbon tax is scheduled to go up. And if the government and Mark Carney and the Liberal Party in a campaign are saying, well, we'll get to it after the election, that is a great foil for Mr. Poilievre to say, sure you will, like all the other things he did. So, there could be many surprises in the next few weeks, as we assume that we'll be off to an election.
Okay. Quickly, I guess, last word to Marcy. What do we have to look out for in the next several days in this weird period between the formation of a new government and the choice going to voters in an election. What are the touchstone moments of the next several days that we have to keep an eye on?
Well, we've never experienced a moment quite like this, as we've discussed previously, just catapulting from a leadership race right into a general with almost no time to catch one's breath. So, a few things to watch. Naturally, all eyes are going to be on Mark Carney. As he makes his debut, I think this trip to Europe is a good opportunity. Every international trip comes with risk. I think all prime ministers have learned that, risk or reward. Canadians will have the opportunity to see him for the first time as their spokesperson on the international stage. I think the reception by the Brits and the French will be very warm. So obviously less risk entailed than going to DC out of the gate. So we're watching that. In the background, we are watching how the campaign takes shape. Will it still be the same Liberal campaign team that it was? Is that going to shift? I understand some of the platform pieces are going to change pretty fundamentally as Mr. Carney puts his stamp on the party and the apparatus. Candidate watch, big time. Again, there were a lot of big names rumored to be coming in directly into cabinet today, which, of course, reminding your listeners, although they are avid political watchers, that you can actually put somebody directly into cabinet without them holding an elected seat in the Commons. Mr. Harper did so with Michael Fortier. There was some anticipation that we would see a big name or two leapfrog right into cabinet while they, intended to run in the general. That didn't happen today. So where are those big names? I think some of them are going to materialize, and that's going to be really fundamental for this prime minister, as we've said through the course of this conversation today. Didn't feel like new. There wasn't so much there. That's got to come together, and that will come together if it does in the new faces that appear in the coming days. So I'm watching for that, looking to fill a slate of candidates. Gary's going to fill a spot for the Conservatives. All three of the major parties, maybe we hope, all three of the major parties still have a lot of slots to fill before that writ goes before that writ gets dropped. And if we're talking about a campaign in T minus 11, 10 or 11 days, that's not a heck of a lot of time to fill a slate and do all the due dil and vetting that needs to happen. So, I mean, those are just a few of the pieces to watch for, not to mention policy announcements, not to mention maybe some form of communication with the Trump White House, if not directly in Washington over the phone. I would be surprised if Mr. Carney didn't take a call or make a call. And that in and of itself will be a whole news cycle, right? So this is going to be still a busy week. It's really just begun.
I was
I don't
going to
know about.
joke, Paul. I was going to
Yep.
joke, Paul, that whatever you think of Mark Carney, I don't think on his first international trip is going to ask somebody what the totality of their acreage is, as a former prime minister did on their first international trip.
That is a deep cut. That you and I are the only guys old enough to remember Joe Clark. Uh, well, there's a lot going on. I don't know about all y'all, but I'm getting better at catnapping because there are no full nights of sleep anymore. But it's giving us an excuse to see each other a little more often. We're going to keep meeting a little more frequently through a campaign. Garry, you get a pass. Go get them, and we'll be watching very closely your adventures. Thanks, everyone.
Congrats,
Thank
Garry.
you. It could be a long one or it could be a short one. We'll see.
Good luck, Gary.
Thank you.